Up until fairly recently, I hadn't really been playing many new games. I only actually started trying newer and more revered stuff in the last year because now I had a reason to and the means to in the form of this channel. But before I started properly making content, there was only a small handful of games I put a significant amount of time into. I dabbled in a few platformers, mainly from the 6th generation, as I still had a few original Xbox and PS2 games that I never finished as a kid. There was also the occasional shooter, although the only ones I got any significant time into there were Halo 3 and 4, mostly down to the fact that my parents saw them as less violent than other shooters, and because I sucked at other shooters. But the two most played games should be pretty obvious if you just look at my username. I made the original account when I was only 10 years old, and at that time there were two games that I had played most. One of them was Minecraft. Because, of course it was Minecraft. At that point in 2012 to 2016, it seemed like literally every kid played Minecraft, and the ones that didn't at least had friends that did, or they watched Minecraft content themselves. But the other half of my username is a bit more indirect, because it doesn't specifically reference any one game, but more a genre of games, in this instance alluding to my longtime love for racing games. At the time I made the account, there was no racing game I enjoyed more than the original Forza Horizon. Forza felt different to me. At that time, my only experience with racing games was the black box era from Need for Speed, sans Hot Pursuit 2 and Undercover, Midnight Club 3 in LA, and the best Burnout game. But Forza felt different, in a lot of unique and compelling ways. Despite its labeling as an arcade racer, I always thought of it as one of the more realistic of that subgenre. Not because it was the hardest to drive or the one most suited for a wheel and pedal setup, but more so because it gave the player a feel for the car that made the game really fun to race in, especially at a competitive level, while still being beginner friendly enough for anyone to pick it up and start learning. But unlike the Simcades of the time that used to fulfill that exact purpose, Forza Horizon oozed style like the best arcade racers, meaning it didn't feel as clinical or soft as the more realistic racers did. It just felt fun. But as time passed, I slowly started losing interest in the series, and by early 2023, a year and a half after its 5th entry, I had nearly lost all desire to play the games. So, I made a video about it, detailing my positives and negatives with the games and why I thought they had gotten worse over time. I still like and mostly agree with this video, even though it probably could have used some more work, and I definitely could have done it much better now. I mean, come on, it was my 4th proper attempt at a full-length video. It was gonna have problems. And as expected, I got some criticism, some from people who understood where I was coming from, but disagreed because of what the game still had to offer. Some who just belittled me, saying they had never experienced any of my issues with the games, and saying I was just nitpicking and biased. But a large number of people said they saw what I was saying and often agreed, but said it didn't matter to them because of how they played the game. Which made me think about something which I had known for years up to that point, but hadn't fully realized, which was that most people that play the Horizon games don't play them like a racing game. Because in my experience with those games, especially with Horizons 4 and 5, both the game and the community have been steadily shifting their focus away from the racing and towards literally everything else. Like during my middle school days playing FH4, I would often spend hours on my 1S scrolling through the looking for group post menus, looking for people to join up with to race. And as far back as I can remember, even if there were 2, 3, maybe 400 posts looking for players, less than 10 of them would be for racing at any given time, usually only about 2 or 3. The rest would be cops versus civs, car meets, drag racing, tandem drifting, cruises, and people looking to sell modded accounts. And it wasn't just the players either. The game itself was seemingly drifting away from racing as its focus, with the AI not having any appreciable improvement since the first Horizon, The races giving roughly the same rewards no matter how low you finished, giving little incentive to try in races. A still unbalanced performance index system which made tuning for competitive racing a chore and an annoyance for many players, especially with the scourge of all-wheel drive only builds and insane power builds. Online connection issues that made online racing nearly untenable, and a community of racers that would very often just shunt and ram other players out of the way for the slightest chance at victory. But just because the players don't treat it like a racing game, and the racing itself isn't the most enjoyable, that doesn't make it not a racing game. Which begs a valid question of, well, what is a racing game? I had never really thought of this question before, because I was always in the mindset of, I know it when I see it when it comes to what was and what wasn't a racing game. But over time, I realized it was far more complex than that. At some point I might revisit this idea to make it its own video, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to say that a racing game is a game where the player spends a majority of their playtime, at or at least 50%, racing against either a computer opponent, another person, or some kind of time trial, usually with some sort of vehicle involved. Also, to make it more clear, here's some questions that I know some people will ask. No, how realistic a game is doesn't matter. Arcade racers are still racing games, and racing sims are still racing games. Even though iRacing and Grid feel nothing alike, they are both racing games just the same. Burnout 3 counts because there's roughly an equal number of race events as there are crash events in that game. Trackmania counts. I would say a racing game without vehicles counts, but that means if they made a game about track running, it would also be a racing game. But I would really just consider that a sports game, and I know sports and racing games are often categorized together, but that's a different problem. But that would also mean something like Sonic R is a sports game, which I don't think feels right either. So I guess it depends on whether or not the game resembles a racing game mechanically, because Sonic R still controls and responds like a sort of racing game, and is obviously very different from something like Madden or FIFA. Although there are many games that are both racing and sports games in the form of motorsport games. Rally, F1, NASCAR, and all other licensed motorsport titles would fall into this category. Here's an example where things get more complicated. GTA 5. Now I would say that GTA doesn't count. Yes, it has racing elements and a lot of racing content, but it could equally be called a business sim, heisting game, an RPG, or an FPS, because it has elements of all of those in there, but not enough for any one of them to be the majority. It's just more of an action game in a similar vein to games like Far Cry and Ass Creed. However, to many players, this game functions as a racing game because they spend nearly all of their time playing the game just doing races. Another example is Assetto Corsa. At its core, it's a racing simulator with very bare bones and clunky gameplay elements. It's fine on its own, but it works best as a car experience simulator as well as a community-driven modding testbed, allowing thousands of players to experiment with all the different creations people can make, from just modding cars in from other games to basically creating entirely new game modes within Assetto. Another game also in that category would be BeamNG Drive, although I don't see anyone saying it's necessarily a racing game, and I agree there. So we've established what a racing game is and how they can differ on a mechanical level, at least to some extent, and how the perception of a game can change how it may be categorized for some. So now we have the question to ask of, is Forza Horizon still a racing game? To help me answer this question, similar to what I did in my GT video, I contacted 3 significant community members who interact with and get to see large parts of the Forza community firsthand. Starting off, we have ES Grumpy, someone who's been in the community for nearly 4 years now, and whose most significant contribution is being the creator of the Forza International Drivers Association, or FIDA for short. They fill a similar role to what the FIA does in real life by partnering with communities to help them build, organize, cast, and promote race events, and even making a few themselves. I even helped promote one of their events and made the trailer for their Rally Legends event a few months back. Their members primarily consist of the leaders of major Horizon racing communities organized over Discord, including Street Wars, Racing Haven, Horizon Racing Academy, Horizon Tuning Car Championship, and one that relates to another person I interviewed, Team Wars, of which N7 Matsura is its current owner. While Matsura wasn't its original founder, he has been the primary figure over Team Wars for the better part of 4 years, with Team Wars itself being the single most competitive place for racing in the Horizon games, featuring some of the fastest drivers in the game competing in 6v6 team races. I almost think of it like the Horizon community's equivalent to Formula 1, because it's where the best of the best come to race. But it's also where the salt intake and internal politicking knows no limits for many inside it.
Fucking man!
And lastly, we have HokiHoshi, who many of you will likely already be familiar with as a content creator with over 150,000 subscribers, covering all kinds of racing games, but most often Forza, with some of his most successful and even a few of his oldest videos being tuning and driving guides for Horizons 3 and 4. And I went to all 3 of them and got their opinions on where they thought Horizon was at the moment.
It's funny, like, even just your main premise of, like, is Forza Horizon still a racing game is something, like, we've discussed on my stream to some length.
Right.
Numerous times in the past. So
I've thought about it specifically
be fun to talk
because,
about.
like, one of my biggest videos was, and to be fair, I've always, well, not always, but, like, since I started playing Forza Horizon, I've been a big fan of those games, but, like,
sure.
whenever I was one of the people who wasn't as big on, like, Horizon 4 and 5, especially, like, after, because I played a lot of 4, like, I think my total playtime is, like, 200 days or something like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
To be fair, some of my dislike may have just been from, like, burnout, but I made a video saying, like, here are my grievances with the modern games, and I basically reviewed all 5 of them in order.
Sure.
And I got a lot of comments basically saying that, like, I like the game not for the racing, or not for the cars, or not for trying to portray, like, a racing atmosphere, or things that related back to, especially, like, Horizon 1. And that made me think of the question, like, are the strongest points of Horizon 1 not at all to do with its racing?
I would say they're not, but obviously we can get into that.
Right. What do you do when you get on Forza Horizon? This is, like, now kind of time. Even if that might be, like, fairly limited.
Yeah, so at the moment, my time is kind of split between sometimes doing seasonals if there's a car which I actually want to add to my garage, but that's pretty rare. Otherwise, I'll be running tracks, making blueprints, submitting those tracks to various organizations I'm a part of, or building new tracks is a lot of what I spend my time doing.
As a whole, it was basically always the same loop. It was finding a car that I found interesting, trying to build it and set it up, and then hopping into races and seeing how stuff compares. Like, that was the regular gameplay loop. But to be honest, since I took over Team Wars, all I ever did was test for regulations, test tracks, and whenever I didn't do that, I was just racing online, racing other people.
These are people who interact with hundreds of different players on a near weekly basis, and both from their own experiences and the experiences of others they've talked with, they seem to not be super interested in the actual racing present in the game. Take HokiHoshi. In my interview with him, he talked about how he looks at Forza less like a racing game and more as a vehicle to get the experience of modern car culture, but in Forza's virtual open world, free of all the costs and restrictions placed on similar activities in real life.
I wouldn't say I really boot up with any goal in mind anymore, unless it's obviously to make a video or something like that.
Right.
But if I'm just booting up to play, I'm just kind of booting up to, like, exist in that space, because it's just kind of a fun space to be in.
Okay.
So yeah, that's another thing that I think Horizon does facilitate really well, is, like,
Yeah.
there is so much different stuff to do depending on your mood. And, you know, a lot of my buddies will want to, like, jump in and just do, like, back-to-back PvP racing, and, like, sometimes I'm in the mood for that,
Yeah.
but a lot of times I'm not.
Fair.
I think ultimately it depends on the person. You know, some people do jump into Forza Horizon and all they do is race, and for them, yeah, it's a racing game. But I would say for me, racing is like one of the least important parts of that game. And admittedly, I'd say it's not even one of the most fun parts of the game, with some minor exceptions.
Right.
It kind of attaches to real life car culture to me, where, you know, I'm a part of real life car culture. A weird way to say that, but
Yeah.
And for me, like the elements that I like about owning a fun car are not going and racing it. Like, that's part of it,
Right.
but it's you know, going to car meets and hanging out with buddies and working on and modifying the car. I love building cars. Like, that's what's so fun to me. And like, you know, going on cruises or you know, seeing some other cool car on the highway and chasing them or you know, just kind of cruising for a little bit, like that to me is car culture, and that to me is kind of what I get out of Forza Horizon, where I like building cars, I like experimenting with cars, I like experiencing them in the open world. I do really enjoy those times when I am, you know, in a convoy and we're just kind of goofing off doing whatever. I really like doing little car meets and stuff
Right.
like that, because that's kind of what I get out of it.
I'm not as directly hooked into the modern car culture landscape as many others, so my thoughts on how well it's represented are gonna be a bit skewed, but as far as I can tell, Forza does do a good job at giving you the tools to create scenarios and environments that relate to someone in that scene. Another thing we discussed was looking at Forza as a sandbox to create events, experiences, and even races in. I talked with both Hoki and Grumpy about this specifically, because they both have experience making tracks and events with their respective communities. Hoki's most notable was probably his recreation of Tsukuba entirely in the Event Lab editor, and Grumpy has made a number of tracks, including several for the Horizon Racing Academy, a community dedicated to showing players the ropes for competitive racing in Horizon 5, and letting them test their skills in a manner similar to that of the Gran Turismo license tests. You're very familiar with like the Event Lab stuff and like making custom events. One idea I've seen floated is like rivals for custom events, or like having leaderboards for those.
I would love that. But yeah, leaderboards are such an easy way to add like near infinite gameplay, because
Right.
two people who like chasing leaderboards, because again, the content is just other people.
Yeah.
And as long as there are other people on the leaderboards and everyone's kind of, you know, climbing the ladder or falling down, like, you always have something to shoot for.
Right.
I recently did a thing where it was an Event Lab thing that was like a time an autocross track, and the goal was to beat a specific time around the autocross track. But you can't really do a rivals thing with that. You can't have a leaderboard unless you manually make people, you know, submit their times with a screenshot or whatever.
Yeah.
And again, like, if you take it back, one of the other big things I've done is my test track. I made like a HokiHoshi official test track early on in Horizon 5's life, and we managed a third-party Discord leaderboard for that, which has been cool. It's been an awesome project, but it's something that we have had to build and we have had to manage ourselves, and we have to manually enter every single entry.
Right.
And if the game could just do that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of like the is Horizon a racing game shortcoming comes from, is the tools are all there, but then the community has had to kind of do something with them. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. It's so clear to me that there is a community desire for it, because the amount of work that everyone has put into it. I mean, you know, I've chatted with a lot of the FIDA guys and the Racing Haven guys, and it's a hell of a lot of work, and they're not getting paid to do it. You know, and same with us for HTCC. I didn't make money on the HTCC. I spent money on the HTCC, but I wanted to have a good competitive league, and so I made one. And it's the same situation with everybody else. Yeah, with Street Wars, Team Wars, Racing Haven, whatever. It's just a passion for it. And if the game could build those systems in and make it easier for the community to host these competitions and do whatever they want to do in the game, I think it would be a very, very, very good thing for the game. And it would make it more of a racing game.
Right. Matsura and Grumpy also gave an insightful look into thinking about Forza as a competitive experience. As a small aside, I often see players talk about the Horizon games in a way that means thinking about them as racing games is the wrong way of looking at them, both from people who love the games, but say they are better judged as something outside of competitive racing games, and those who have an abject disdain for the series, dismissing them as nothing but games for kids that ruin the Forza name. And to an extent, both are correct, but are also missing the point. The Horizon games do appeal to a more casual and often younger audience than the motorsport games do. That's literally their purpose within the Forza lineup. But just because something is aimed at a casual audience doesn't mean there can't be some form of competition. I mean, that hasn't stopped top Smash players, Mario 64 speedrunners, or Minecraft PvP masters, and arguably Forza Horizon has a better claim to competition than all of them, because in some form, racing will always be about competition. Racing is and always has been a very binary sport. You either win or you lose, and you can lose in many different degrees. So any racing game, even ones as casual as Mario Kart, can and probably should try to support their competitive scenes. And here's two of the people bringing that support to the Horizon games. For like those specifically like looking for more of a traditional race game experience, do you think the game has enough content for people who want a more conventional racing game?
Yes, but you can't find it. I think that people who like Sims and want to be competitive and want to find good racing, if they drop into the Twitch stream of someone like Mars, someone like Nalak, and they get told sort of what's decent and get told how to tune up their cars, and they get in those CA streams and they start racing with those guys who are known to be clean and known to be fast and know how to do racing lines and how to overtake safely, then they're going to have a great time. And that is available in the game because you can do pretty much everything. But if you're a guy who's used to, say Gran Turismo 7 or the Forza Motorsport series or Assetto Corsa Competizione, and you come in and you're expecting to get any kind of racing with the AI, if you're expecting to get any kind of racing that's easily accessible to you as a newer player, say like first 10 hours, you're going to struggle to find enjoyment in Horizon, despite the fact that I think most people find the physics very comfortable and very nice to play. I know a lot of people who literally just come on the game, drive around in free roam and enjoy a couple cars and then hop off because the physics are just nice. They really nailed that side down, but there's just not many ways to use them if you're kind of a racer.
That reminds me a bit of like a sentiment that I hear often is because there's the two parts of the Forza series, like the Motorsports and the Horizons, and a sentiment that I remember hearing a lot, like whenever I first was in stuff like Team Wars and stuff like that, was that a lot of people were saying, oh, if you want competitive racing, just go play Motorsport, which to me always seemed kind of like not very helpful.
Yeah, and it always struck me as odd. And I think these people approach it from the angle of real-world motorsports, and that the more close you get to real-world physics and real-world motorsport, the more competitive that it can be. But if you look at other driving games, like Trackmania, not realistic in any way whatsoever. But the fact that there is consistency, enjoyable physics, and a vibrant community means it has a thriving competitive scene. And then you look at shooters, what's closest to real life, like Arma. People don't host Arma tournaments very often, but they do host Call of Duty tournaments and Counter-Strike tournaments. And these things aren't realistic whatsoever, but they have clean, arcade mechanics which have been built to foster enjoyment from all levels of play whilst also allowing skill expression. And I think Horizon has that. I think the Motorsport also has that. But just saying this one's more realistic, therefore it's better as a competitive experience verbatim, I don't think that's necessarily correct, and it's something that I think only the motorsport genre actually feels.
Right.
I think there can be friendly races. I can think they're called track days.
Right.
It's one of the biggest concepts in why people go to racetracks in real life. Like, most of the time people are on tracks, they're not going for hot laps, they're just going to drive a little bit quicker and sportier in a environment where people are doing the same. But if you have a video game that is focused on performance cars and people's dream cars, I just do not know, and I do not understand how measuring which one of those is the quickest, or what driver in which one of those and where is the quickest. I do not understand how that can become an afterthought. It's like if you put Ferraris and Lamborghinis in a very accessible platform, then surely at some point the people who have access to these cars might want to see which one is the quickest, right?
Right.
To me, it's absolutely inexplicable how, well, you put races where people race each other, where people see who is faster than each other, into a game, and treated with a lack of attention that almost feels like it's a neglected afterthought. I don't understand that at all.
Right.
So to me, come on, it's a game centered of performance cars. Make the racing good.
A big question with all of this, though, is why should it matter? Why does it matter if a game is categorized a certain way? That doesn't affect what the game is at its core. Sorta. The reason I wanted to determine whether or not Forza Horizon is still a racing game or not is because, at least at a surface level, it affects how I think about the game. Because, as many of you will know if you saw my last video covering the Horizon games, I think they fall short at being good racing games. So if I think about it like a racing game, it's kinda bad. But if I think about it as something more like a car experience and automotive sandbox, it's actually pretty good. You can make whatever event type you want. You can cruise any road or cross any part of the map at any time. You can find thousands of people with the same tastes and interests as you, and you can all make interesting and unique cars, tracks, and events with all different gameplay styles. You can have some amazing experiences with Forza. And looking back, I can now see why so many people enjoy this game, because it's a racing game where you can do anything you want. Unless that thing is racing.